Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 102, and we're going to cover 2 Samuel chapters 3 through 5. Last time we left off, Saul had died, and now David is made king over Judah, but Saul's son, Ishbosheth, is made king over Israel by Abner. And we're about to see that change today. So chapter 3, verse 1 starts off by saying, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew steadily stronger, but the house of Saul grew weaker continually." And you're starting to see practically what was already true positionally. Remember, God stripped Saul's dynasty and his kingship because of his two sins. The first one with making that sacrifice prematurely and presumptuously, and the second time for not fully destroying the Amalekites. And you're just seeing that come into fruition now. And here's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So remember in the past that we've talked about one way in this ancient Near Eastern culture to show that you believe you have rights as the next king is to lay with the previous king or your father's concubine. And so Abner is accused of doing that. Let's listen to that starting in verse 6. It says, "It came about while there was a war between the house of Saul and the house of David that Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, 'Why have you gone into my father's concubine?'" And see, there it is. You saw this with Reuben, Jacob's son. You'll see it again with Absalom, and you'll even see it again with Adonijah when it's time for Solomon to take the reign. And so it's here, but Abner strikes back. It says in verse 8 that he was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I will show kindness to the house of Saul your father and to his brothers and his friends, and have not delivered you into the hands of David. And yet today you charge me with the guilt concerning the woman." And he says in verse 9, "May God do so to Abner, and more also, if as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba." You even see Abner knows that the kingdom belongs to David. And it says in verse 11, that he could no longer answer Abner a word because he was afraid of him. Then Abner sent messengers to David in his place, saying, "Who is the land? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you, and bring all Israel over you." And David agrees. He says, "I'll do this. Just bring me Michal, my wife, that I received with 100 Philistine foreskins." And so they accomplish that. He gets Michal back, and they take her from her current husband, and he followed her for a while weeping, but Abner tells him, "Go, return home." So Abner says to David, "Let me arise and go gather all Israel to my lord, the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may be king over all that your soul desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. But remember, Abner killed Joab's brother. Joab is going to come back in verse 24 and say, "What have you done? Abner has come to you to spy out the land and just learn about how you're moving." He uses the words, "You're going out and you're coming in to find all that you're doing." And it's interesting that Joab is saying Abner is being deceptive when actually he's being deceptive because he wants to avenge his brother's death. So Abner goes to Hebron. Now remember, Hebron is a refuge city and no murders are to take place here. And this just shows you how hot the anger is of Joab and his brother Abishai. And they chase Abner down in Hebron. And in verse 30, it says that they kill him and put him to death. And I want to show you the power of how David is growing in strength. Look at what he does when Abner is killed. He just simply writes a song. He laments. And this song becomes popular. The people love it. They understand that he wasn't at fault. And he finds favor with the people. It says it in verse 36. "Now all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all of Israel understood that day that it had not been the will of the king to put Abner to death." And it's just like whatever David does, it works. God's favor, his hand is upon him, And you're just seeing that over and over, that God is growing David in strength. But don't forget our practical application. It didn't come without what? Refinement. This man has been refined, and the appointed day for him to be king is now. It wasn't when he was running in the wilderness. Remember, God sent Moses to the wilderness for 40 years. He was 40 when he went, so he was 80 when he came back to face Pharaoh. And now David is going through the same thing. He's not 80, he's 30 when he becomes king, because we'll see at the end of our chapters, he reigns for 40 years. In fact, that's how you can remember our three kings: Saul, David, and Solomon. Saul reigns for 40 years, David reigns for 40 years, and Solomon reigns for 40 years. So 40, 40, 40. You can remember those three pretty easily. We're going to start learning about a lot of different kings. So if we could start off pretty well with the first three, we'll be doing pretty good. I'll have to post a chart of all of the kings in the show notes when we get to them, because the nation is obviously going to split after Solomon, and we'll get kings on both sides. And remember, we talked about dynasties. So one nation is going to have a dynasty. Remember, Judah will always have a Davidic king, but the nation of Israel won't have a dynasty. Their dynasty will shift over many times. They won't have any stability. And that's how you'll grow to know whether God is on your side, is because you'll have stability. But David writes this hit song. The people love it. We move into chapter 4, and Ishbosheth is murdered. It says in verse 1 that he heard that Abner had died in Hebron, and he lost courage, and all Israel was disturbed. Now let's look at verse 4. It says, now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came to Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame. And his name is Mephibosheth. And this is the guy we're going to learn about that David shows kindness to. But since we've been reading our Old Testament a little more carefully, we see he shows kindness to him because he vows to Saul that he would take care of his house after he dies. And you just see David being an honest, righteous man of valor, a man of integrity, holding true to his word. But you also just see even the kindness of David there, which we can draw some similarities here as him being a type of Christ, as he shows grace to those who normally wouldn't receive it. And David gets another test. People come to him in verse 8, and they bring him the head of Ishbosheth to David in Hebron and said, here's the head of Ishbosheth. And David reminds them, look, when this happened to me before, someone said that Saul is dead, thinking that they were bringing him good news. He had to check him and put him in his place. And he's saying, look, the same is going to happen to you. So he kills the man for bringing him that news, for touching the Lord's anointed son. And that moves us to chapter 5. And we finally get it. David is placed king over all of Israel. Listen to verse 1. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David in Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. Previously, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and in. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel. And we get our time frames. Remember, 40, 40, 40. Here's our 40 for David. This is in verse 4. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over Israel and Judah. And now our chapters are going to end with a series of battles. He's going to have a war with the Jebusites in verse 6. And they mock him, talking about, you cannot come here, but the blind and the lame will turn you away. Thinking David cannot enter here, nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. And so this is our first occurrence of the word Zion in scripture, and he renames it the city of David. And it's interesting here where it says, you keep hearing, therefore the blind or the lame shall not come into the house. And Jesus ties to this when he's making his conquest to Jerusalem to die on the cross. When you get to a similar place, there are blind and lame people there. And the mockery is, you can't enter here because the blind and the lame people will turn you away. When Jesus gets there, guess what he does? The blind and the lame people can't turn him away because he heals them all. And you just see that miracle there of Jesus one-upping everything that David does. And if you're reading through 2 Samuel, you'll truly see how Jesus is the true Davidic king. But we're talking about David right now. In verse 10, it says, David became greater, for the Lord God of hosts was with him. And the chapter ends where he has a war with the Philistines. He seeks the Lord as he should, and he takes them out. And the battles that plagued Saul, the Philistines would hem him up, and he would always have problems with them. You're just going to see David conquering them, taking them out left and right. He's striking them down, and that's how our chapter ends today in verse 25. Then David did so just as the Lord commanded him, and struck down the Philistines from Gibeah as far as to Gezer. So we got our king, and next time we're going to have the Davidic covenant introduced to us. So you don't want to miss that, because that's going to unlock a lot of the Bible for you. You're going to need to know about the Davidic covenant, because you're going to see David fulfill it, and you're going to see Jesus Christ fulfill it. So let's grab that knowledge, our journey of biblical literacy, so we can keep unlocking truths and gaining mastery of the scriptures. Talk to you next time. You guys take care.
Yeah.